I turned on the small heater and sank into the old leather chair with a grunt. Outside the window, the October rain, typical of Big Stone Gap, drizzled, beating monotonously on the roof. The fifth year without Miriam had been particularly hard, not because of business or health, but because of the piercing loneliness that had grown more acute over the years. I had inherited the Abbott and Sons printing firm from my father, but I had not changed the sign, although my only son Lorenz had never shown any interest in the family business. Now, at 67, I still came to the print shop 6 days a week, though I could have stayed away, thanks to the two savvy managers I'd hired after Miriam's death. Mr. Abbott, you have a visitor, said Irma, my secretary for the last 20 years. Who is it, Irma? I wasn't expecting anyone. Mr. Hitchcock from the municipal library, about the booklet order. I sighed. This morning I planned to deal with the tax returns I'd been putting off for a week. Show him out, please. While Irma went to fetch her visitor, I took a quick look around the office. An old oak desk, a worn armchair, a cabinet with samples of paper and bindings, a few letters on the wall, and a picture of Miriam. Everything looked modest, but good. Nothing superfluous. Lorenz had always reproached me for making the office look like the 50s, but I didn't see the point in change for change's sake. The profits from the print shop were stable and more than sufficient. Digital printing, which we were among the first in the county to introduce, gave a good margin. But I've always maintained the principle that money should be spent wisely. I lived in the same 2-story house I'd bought with Miriam 30 years ago, drove a 10-year-old Buick, and invested most of my profits in safe bonds and funds, as my financial advisor had advised. Good morning, Mr. Abbott. The gray-haired librarian extended his hand. Thank you for taking the time. Always happy to help the library, Mr. Hitchcock. Have a seat. We spent the next hour discussing ordering informational booklets for the new reading program. I listened carefully and suggested several designs that could fit within the library's modest budget. You know, Hitchcock said at the end, other printers have offered us cheaper options. But not with this quality of paper and printing, I said calmly. These booklets will be in the hands of children. They must be durable and safe. The colors we use are non-toxic, and the paper will stand up to water and dirty fingers. Hitchcock smiled. That's why we came to you. By the way, how is your grandson doing? Christian, right? He used to frequent our library in high school. Yes, Christian. I smiled involuntarily at the mention of my grandson. Sir Masurin. He graduated from college 2 years ago and is a physics teacher at Lee County High School. Give him my best. Smart young man. After the librarian left, I went back to my papers, but my thoughts kept returning to my grandson. My relationship with Christian had always been warmer than with my son, at least until the last few years when the boy seemed to have begun to adopt his parents' prejudice. Lawrence and his wife Olivia considered me a money-conscious old man, although they themselves never missed an opportunity to ask for financial help. Lawrence worked for a construction company, constantly changing positions, and Olivia taught art at an elementary school. They lived in a big house with a pool, drove new cars, and regularly took out loans for renovations and travel. I remembered our last major conversation at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Lawrence had asked me for money for a new car, his third in 5 years. Why don't you drive your current one for a couple more years? I asked him. It's practically brand new. Dad, you don't understand, Lawrence sighed as if he were explaining something to a child. In my job, it's important how you look. Clients judge you on your first impression. Soccer, maybe you should impress them with your work, not your car. I couldn't help but be a little sarcastic. When I was your age, I was already running a print shop and saving for you and your mother's future. Don't start with the "in my day" again. Lawrence rolled his eyes. Times have changed. You can't save for your old age like you did. It's not about time, it's about habits, I said firmly. You and Olivia spend more than you earn and take out loans all the time. God, you're so stingy, Olivia intervened, sitting next to me. You've got money and you're saving it like Scrooge McDuck. For what? To take it to your grave? The conversation ended in a fight. From then on, we saw each other rarely, mostly on birthdays and holidays, and even then not for long. I noticed a change in my grandson's attitude toward me. Christian no longer stopped by just to talk like he used to. And when we met, he was polite but distant. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my unpleasant memories. Farnsworth Abbott speaking. Grandpa? It's Christian. I straightened in my chair, surprised by my grandson's call. Christian, it's good to hear from you, my boy. How are you? I'm fine, Grandpa. I, uh, I have news. You could hear the excitement in my grandson's voice. I'm getting married. You're getting married? I was genuinely surprised. I didn't even know my grandson had a serious relationship. That's wonderful. Who is this girl? Dash. Her name is Tess Galloway. She teaches yoga at the health center. We met 6 months ago at the town festival. Only 6 months? I frowned. Isn't that a little soon for a wedding? There was a pause on the other end. Grandpa, I'm 24 years old. I know what I'm doing. I bit my tongue. I didn't want to start the conversation by criticizing. Of course, Christian, I'm just surprised. You've never even mentioned her before. Well, we haven't talked that much lately. He sounded slightly offended. It was true, and part of the blame was mine. After Miriam died, I'd become withdrawn, and the conflicts with Lorenz had only made things worse. You're right, and I'm sorry about that. So when's the wedding? A month from today, November 18th. I know it's fast, but we found the perfect place for the ceremony, and they just got off another booking. I see. And where will it be? UH Woodlands Manor on the outskirts of town. It's a very beautiful place, with a view of the mountains. I whistled. The Woodlands was the most expensive wedding venue in the county. Not cheap, I remarked cautiously. Yeah, Christian hesitated for a moment. Tessa's parents are picking up some of the cost, and she and I were saving too. I knew the teacher's salary in our district. Even with the most austerity, Christian could hardly have saved enough for a wedding like this in 6 months. Look, Christian, I wish I could help. This is a big day in your life. Grandpa, really don't, the grandson said quickly. We can handle it. You know our parents think we should be on our own. I barely held back a sigh. Lorenz and Olivia had been taking money from me for years, but they'd boasted about their independence and taught Christian to do the same. I'd really like to give you a wedding present, I insisted. And I see no reason to wait until after the wedding. Really, you don't have to, Christian's voice sounded strained. Just come to the ceremony, okay? I'll send you a formal invitation the other day. After the conversation, I sat for a long time, staring out the window at the drizzling rain. Something in my grandson's tone made me uneasy. It was as if he was embarrassed of me, didn't want me to be a part of his big day. It pained me to think that Lorenz and Olivia's stories about the stingy old man had affected his attitude toward me. 3 days later, a courier delivered an envelope with ornate gold embossing. Inside was an invitation to the wedding of Christian Abbott and Tess Galloway. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters. The paper was of good quality, the design elegant, the work of a professional. Invitations like this didn't come cheap. The handwritten note said, "We hope to see you on our special day, Grandpa." Christian and Tess. It wasn't Christian's handwriting. His fiancée must have written it. I set the invitation aside and pulled out my phone. The Woodlands wedding planner's number was quickly found online. The Woodlands Manor, event management, how can I help you? A pleasant female voice answered the phone. Good afternoon. My name is Farnsworth Abbott. My grandson Christian is getting married at your estate on November 18th. I'd like to discuss the possibility of paying some of the expenses without informing him. Of course, Mr. Abbott. We often deal with surprises like this. Could you come down to our office to discuss the details? Yes, of course. When would that be convenient for you? We have a window tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Would that work? That's fine. The next day, I arrived at the Woodlands at 10 sharp. The estate was impressive. A white colonial building with columns, surrounded by a manicured park. The back facade had a magnificent view of the mountains, which was where the receptionist had told me the ceremony was planned. I was greeted in the bright office by an elegant woman in her 40s with a clipboard in hand. Dash, Mr. Abbott? I'm Cheryl Price, head organizer. Nice to meet you. Likewise, Ms. Price. Please tell us how we can help you. I explained that I wanted to pay for most of the wedding as a gift, but to do it anonymously. I understand, she nodded. Surprises like this are always touching. Let me show you the estimate we made for Mr. Abbott and Miss Galloway. The amount she named made me wince. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it, but it was an impressive figure, even by the standards of luxury weddings. Pretty expensive, I remarked. It's a premium package, Cheryl explained. It includes all-day rental of the entire estate, a marquee in case of inclement weather, catering by the Laurel Leaf Restaurant, floral arrangements, music by a live orchestra, a premium bar, and a photographer and videographer. Christian and Tess have already prepaid? Yes, 10%, she checked her clipboard. The principal is due a week before the event. I wondered. Was 10% all they could scrape together? Or were Tess's parents really going to help? Say, Cheryl, we can do this. I'll pay 80% of the total and let them contribute the last 10% as planned. That way they won't feel that they are totally dependent on my help. Cheryl smiled. That's very wise, Mr. Abbott, and very generous of you. One more thing, I added. I'd like this information to remain confidential until after the wedding. Then you can tell them that the bill was paid by an anonymous benefactor or something. Of course, but I should warn you that they'll still find out on the day of the wedding that most of the expenses have already been paid. That's not a problem. The important thing is that they don't know until then. I want them to calmly prepare for the ceremony without worrying about money. After all the details were agreed upon, I signed the contract and made the wire transfer. Cheryl assured me that everything will be organized at the highest level and my grandson and bride will be satisfied. Returning home, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The joy of being able to help Christian was overshadowed by the thought that he didn't even want to ask me to do it. Years of strained relationship with Lorenz had created a wall between us that I didn't know how to overcome. Maybe this wedding will be a new beginning, I thought as I turned into the driveway to the house. Maybe when Christian sees my gift, he'll realize that all those stories about the stingy old man are just a figment of his father's resentment. And maybe we can restore the warm relationship we had when he was a child. I walked into the empty house, turned on the light in the hallway, and hung up my coat. On the wall hung a picture of Miriam and me, taken on our 40-year wedding anniversary, the year before she died. She was smiling her special, slightly shy smile that I love so much. Our boy's getting married, Miriam, I said to the photo. I think you'd like that news. I could almost hear her reply, just don't interfere too much, Farnsworth. Let them build their own lives. I know, I muttered, heading for the kitchen. But a little help never hurts. 2 weeks flew by. I called Cheryl Price regularly, finalizing the details of Christian's wedding. During this time, we agreed on the menu, chose the floral arrangements, and even discussed the music. Cheryl seemed used to dealing with eccentric relatives and didn't ask too many questions about my desire for anonymity. Mr. Abbott, she said during our next conversation. The newlyweds are going to arrive tomorrow at noon for their final meeting. Perhaps you would like to attend as well? Officially, we'll introduce you as the estate's counselor, I wondered. On the one hand, it would be interesting to see how the preparations were going and to meet Christian's future wife. On the other hand, I risked revealing my surprise early. Wouldn't that arouse suspicion? Not at all, Cheryl replied confidently. We have several consultants who help with the organization. Let's say you're in charge of the technical part. Lighting, sound, power supply. Given the nature of your business, it would seem natural. The idea seemed reasonable to me. Besides, I really wanted to see Tess, the girl who'd won my grandson's heart. Okay, Cheryl, I'll be there. The next day, I parked my old Buick away from the main entrance of the manor so Christian wouldn't accidentally recognize my car. Cheryl met me at the service entrance and led me to the conference room where the meeting was to be held. They're 15 minutes late, she informed me, checking her watch. But that's normal for wedding counseling. Nerves, traffic, last-minute fittings. I nodded, looking at the elegant interior of the room. Everything here breathed luxury, from the antique furniture to the crystal chandeliers. Do they already know that most of the bill is paid? I asked. No, Cheryl shook her head. Like you asked, we're keeping it a secret until the day of the wedding. They think they're here to discuss final details and confirm the payment schedule. A few minutes later, voices were heard in the hallway. I instinctively straightened up and pulled on my jacket. The door opened and a young woman was the first to enter. She was tall, slender, with perfectly styled blonde hair and flawless makeup. She wore a simple but obviously expensive cream-colored dress and high-heeled shoes. She was followed by Christian, who had matured considerably since the last time I'd seen him, his shoulders broader, his gaze more confident. "Good afternoon, Ms. Galloway, Mr. Abbott." Cheryl stepped up to meet them. "Thank you for taking the time for this meeting. Allow me to introduce Mr. Abbott, our technical consultant." I stood up, preparing for an awkward moment of recognition, but Christian only nodded politely, showing no sign of recognizing his own grandfather. It must have been too long since we'd last seen each other, or maybe the lighting in the room wasn't too bright. Either way, it played to my advantage. "Farnsworth Abbott," I introduced myself, extending my hand. Christian shook it, and for a moment something flashed in his eyes, so not recognition, more like a vague sense that we'd met somewhere. "Christian. And this is my fiancée, Tess." Tess barely touched my hand with her cool fingers and immediately pulled away. Her smile was as perfect as a magazine cover, but it didn't affect her eyes. "Nice to meet you," she said in a tone that didn't match the words. We sat around the table. Cheryl opened the file folder and began discussing the final details of the wedding. I watched the soon-to-be newlyweds carefully. Christian looked a little nervous, glancing at Tess every now and then, as if seeking her approval. She radiated confidence, making decisions quickly and categorically. The menu, the flowers, the music, everything had to match her idea of a perfect wedding. "What about pictures of your family for the welcome booth?" Cheryl asked. "Have you already prepared them?" "Yes, I'm all set on my end," Tess nodded. Mom has put together a whole gallery." "What about you, Christian?" My grandson visibly tensed. "I've put together a few. Pictures of my parents, school pictures." "What about your grandfather?" I couldn't resist intervening. "Usually, weddings represented several generations of a family." Tess gave Christian a quick glance. "Well," his grandson faltered, "I have a couple of old photos, but we haven't been very close lately." "So, is this the skeevy grandfather your father told me about?" Tess asked with a slight sneer in her voice. I froze, feeling the blood rush to my face. Luckily, Cheryl was quick to change the subject, but Tess's words hung in the air. So that's how I'd been portrayed in their family. A cheapskate, an egomaniac who fussed over every dime. The rest of the meeting was a blur. I answered questions about the technical equipment, made recommendations about lighting and sound, trying not to give away my true knowledge and feelings. Christian occasionally cast thoughtful glances at me, but didn't seem to realize who I was. When the discussion was over, Cheryl offered to show the young people the ceremony grounds and the reception tent. I stayed in the conference room, gathering my notes. Mr. Abbott, Tess appeared in the doorway. "Would you mind a moment?" "Of course, Miss Galloway." I looked up, surprised by her return. She came closer, her movement smooth as a cat's, but her eyes were wary. "I thought you were a little too interested in Christian's grandfather." "Why?" I tried to keep a cool expression on my face. "Just professional interest. In many of the weddings I've consulted on, family photos play an important role, especially the older generation." "Not in this case," Tess cut him off. "Some people are better off staying away from important events unless they're willing to contribute." Her words were like a slap in the face. I was speechless for a moment, stunned by the outright hostility. "I don't quite understand." "Oh, I think you do." Tess smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Some people spend their whole lives saving up money and then wonder why their families drift apart. Pretty sad, isn't it?" With those words, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me completely confused. Obviously, Lorenz and Olivia had done their best to smear me in front of my future daughter-in-law. But why had Christian let it happen? Did he, too, think I was a greedy old man who didn't deserve a place at his wedding? When Cheryl returned, I was almost ready to cancel my gift. "Is something wrong?" she asked, noticing my condition. "You look upset." "Nothing much." I tried to smile. "I was just thinking about some things. Your grandson and Ms. Galloway, they're an unusual couple," Cheryl said carefully. "In what way?" "What?" "Well, they're very different. He seems soft, thoughtful. She's more assertive." I nodded. Cheryl was right. Christian had always been a sensitive, thoughtful kid. How did he get involved with such a rigid, calculating woman? "Maybe opposites attract," I muttered. "Maybe." Cheryl didn't sound convinced. "In any case, Everything is going according to plan. The ceremony is going to be great. I thanked her and headed to my car. My head was buzzing with conflicting thoughts. Maybe I should have just given up on the whole thing. But I had already given my word, signed the contract, transferred the money, and despite Tess's obvious dislike, I still wanted to do something special for Christian. A few days later, Cheryl called with some unexpected news. Mr. Abbott, the newlyweds have made changes to the guest list and seating chart. They want you to know about it. What kind of changes? I inquired, though I had already guessed. They've removed a seat for your character. I mean, for you as Christian's grandfather. They said you probably wouldn't be coming. I felt something clench in my chest, so they weren't even planning to see me at the wedding, despite the formal invitation. I understand, I managed to squeeze out. Mr. Abbott, Cheryl sounded genuinely sympathetic. Do you still want to pay for the wedding? After this, I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to back out, take the money, and forget the whole thing. But the other part, the part that still saw Christian as the little boy who'd once adored his grandfather, didn't let me do that. Yes, Cheryl, I'm not changing my mind. This is a gift to my grandson, regardless of how he or his fiancée feels about me. You are very generous, she said quietly. After that conversation, I spent several sleepless nights thinking about my relationship with my family. Where had I gone wrong? When had the chasm gotten so deep? Perhaps after Miriam's death, I had become too distant, too immersed in my grief. Or perhaps Lorenz had always been jealous of my ability to manage money, my frugality, which he scornfully called avarice. A week before the wedding, I received a strange phone call from Lorenz. Hi, Dad. His voice sounded unusually friendly. How are you doing? Fine, I answered warily. Lorenz rarely called just to chat. Anything wrong? No, I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure you got the invitation to Christian's wedding. Yes, I did. That's great. He'll be happy to see you there. We all will. I snorted incredulously. Really? I was told my place on the seating chart had been removed. There was a pause. Who told you that? Lawrence finally asked, and his tone changed noticeably. It doesn't matter, but is it true? Look, Dad, there may have been some misunderstanding. I'm sure Christian wants you at his wedding. And his fiancée? Tess wants to see me too? Another pause, even longer. Tess. She just doesn't know you that well. Look, why don't you come over for dinner this Friday night? Get to know her better, and I'm sure any misunderstandings will be resolved. I've been thinking, maybe this was a chance to make things right, or was this another attempt by Lawrence to manipulate the situation? Oh, all right, I finally decided. What time should I be there? Make it 7, and Dad. Lorenz hesitated. It would be nice if you dressed up. You know, decent. Tess is very attentive to that sort of thing. I involuntarily glanced at my closet. My clothes were simple, but always clean and tidy. What did he mean by tidy? You don't think I know how to dress for the occasion? I asked, feeling my anger boiling over. No, it's just, Tess is used to a certain level. Her father owns a chain of boutiques in Richmond, and they're always, I'm not sure I do, Lorenz, but I'll try not to embarrass you by looking like this. I hung up the phone, trying to control my irritation. The dinner invitation was obviously for a reason. Perhaps they'd found out about my conversation with the wedding planner, or that I'd paid for most of the event. But how could they have found out? Friday night, I carefully selected my wardrobe, the dark blue suit I'd worn to Miriam's funeral, the fresh white shirt and tie she'd given me for our last birthday together. Looking in the mirror, I saw not a cheapskate old man, but an older but still sturdy man who just wanted to be a part of his family's life. As I pulled up to Lorenz's house, I noticed several unfamiliar cars in the driveway. It looked like there was not just a family dinner coming up, but a real reception. My anxiety increased. Olivia opened the door, dressed in an elegant evening gown. Farnsworth, she exclaimed with feigned enthusiasm. How glad we are that you could come. Come in, everyone's here. I stepped into the spacious hallway and immediately felt the appraising glances. 20 people were gathered in the living room, all in evening clothes, glasses of champagne in their hands. I noticed Christian talking to an older couple in the corner of the room. Standing next to him was Tess, radiant in a dress that must have cost like a used car. "Dad, you made it!" Lawrence materialized beside me, put his arm around my shoulders, and led me to the center of the room. "Friends, let me introduce you to my father, Farnsworth Abbott." I nodded to the crowd, feeling like an exhibit in a museum under the stairs. "And these are Tess's parents, Hamish and Veronica Galloway." Lorenz steered me toward an elegant, middle-aged couple. Hamish Galloway, a tall man with carefully styled graying hair, shook my hand firmly. "We meet at last, Mr. Abbott. We've heard a lot about you." His tone was polite, but there was something like appraisal in his eyes, as if he were calculating how much I was worth. "Likewise," I replied, wondering what exactly he'd heard about me. The evening continued in the same vein, with small talk, an impeccably served dinner, and toasts to the soon-to-be newlyweds. I tried to keep a low profile, but I felt distant, as if I were on the other side of the glass. Christian exchanged a few words with me, but mostly avoided direct contact. Tess was emphatically polite, but cold. During dessert, Hamish Galloway raised his glass. "To our beautiful daughter and her chosen one," he proclaimed, "and to the splendid wedding that awaits them in a week's time. Veronica and I are proud to be able to give them this special day." I froze with fork in hand. "So Tess's parents think they're paying for the wedding?" Lorenz and Olivia met my gaze, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of embarrassment in their eyes. After dinner, I took a moment to pull Lorenz aside. "You didn't tell me it was going to be such a big gathering," I remarked. "Sorry, it was a spontaneous decision," he shrugged. "Tess's parents wanted to meet you before the wedding." "What did you tell them about me?" Lorenz averted his eyes. "Nothing much. That you owned a print shop, that you lived modestly, and that I'm a cheapskate who doesn't want to help his family." "Dad, I never said—" "Don't lie to me, Lawrence," I said quietly but firmly. I'd heard Tess call me grumpy grandpa. Those words didn't come out of nowhere. The son sighed. "Look, I may have been a little harsh in my remarks, but you know how it is. Family conversations, old grudges. Don't take it personally." I shook my head. Lorenz always had a way of avoiding responsibility, shifting the blame to circumstances or other people. "One more thing," I added. "Stori, why do Tess's parents think they're paying for the wedding?" Lorenz visibly tensed. "What are you talking about?" "Hamish's toast. He obviously thinks he's giving the young people a wedding." "Well, they're contributing," Lorenz replied evasively. "Anyway, you have nothing to worry about. Everything is under control." I realized that further questioning was useless. Lorenz was hiding something, but it was impossible to find out the truth now. Soon I said goodbye and left, taking with me a heavy feeling. Something was wrong here. Perhaps Lorenz and Olivia had convinced Tess's parents that they were paying for the wedding to maintain a semblance of prosperity? Or were they really unaware of my contribution? On the way home, I called Cheryl. "Tell me," I asked after greeting her, "did Ms. Galloway's parents make any payments for the wedding?" "No, Mr. Abbott," she replied confidently. "Only a down payment of 10% from the young couple. The rest was paid for by you." "And no one inquired as to who paid the principal?" "No, there were no questions. We are, as you asked, keeping it a secret until the wedding day." I thanked her and hung up, even more puzzled. What was going on in this family? Who was deceiving who and why? As I drove up to the house, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Christian's wedding was supposed to be a joyous occasion, bringing families together. But instead, it was turning into a tangle of lies, innuendo, and manipulation. And I wasn't sure my generous gesture would fix anything. Perhaps it would only make things worse. I parked the car and sat for a long time, staring out the dark windows of my house. "What would you do, Miriam?" I mentally asked. She was always a better judge of character than I was. Always knew how to smooth over sharp edges, how to find her way to the heart of even the most difficult person. But Miriam wasn't around, and it was up to me to decide what to do. I sighed, got out of the car, and walked toward the house, feeling the weight of each step. The wedding was only a few days away, and something told me it wasn't going to be the joyous occasion I'd hoped for. The morning of November 18th was clear and cool, the perfect day for a wedding. I awoke before dawn, though the ceremony was not scheduled until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I couldn't sleep, my thoughts swirling around the upcoming event. Despite all the stress of the past weeks, I truly hoped that today would be a new beginning for our family. I got up, took a shower, and spent a long time choosing clothes. I finally settled on a dark gray suit, which Miriam had always considered the most elegant in my closet. I matched it with a light blue shirt and a silver tie. Looking at myself in the mirror, I thought I looked quite presentable for my age. I didn't feel like having breakfast, so I only drank a cup of strong black coffee. The nervous tension wouldn't let go. To pass the time before I left, I got Christian and Tess a wedding present, an antique watch that had been passed down in our family from father to son for 4 generations. Lawrence had never shown any interest in it, considering it obsolete, but I hoped Christian would appreciate its historical and emotional value. I carefully wrapped the watch in heavy paper, placed it in a velvet box, and wrapped it in silver embossed gift paper. I attached an envelope with a check for a substantial amount. I decided to give a cash gift, even though I had already paid for most of the wedding. At 11 o'clock, I couldn't sit at home any longer. The ceremony was still 3 hours away, but I decided to go to the manor beforehand. Maybe I could help with the final preparations, or just talk to Christian before the ceremony started. The drive to the Woodlands took about 20 minutes. As I approached the manor, I noticed several catering vans and florists at the service entrance. Work was in full swing. I parked in the still nearly empty guest parking lot and headed towards the main entrance, gift in hand. An archway of white flowers and greenery had already been set up at the entrance to the estate, and a white carpet had been laid out along the walkway. Everything looked exquisite and elegant. As I got closer, I noticed a large stand at the entrance decorated with photos. It must be the same welcome booth Cheryl had mentioned, with pictures of the bride and groom's families. I stopped, looking at the pictures, looking for myself among them. And then I saw it. In the very center of the booth, separate from the rest of the photos, hung a portrait of me taken a few years ago at a corporate printing event. But what made me freeze in place was the red sign crossing the photo. No entry. I blinked, not believing my eyes. This had to be some kind of evil joke. Who would do such a thing? Could it have been Tess or Lorenz? Maybe it was just a stupid prank. Dash, Mr. Abbott? Cheryl's voice came from behind me. You're very early. I turned around. Cheryl was standing a few feet away from me, holding a clipboard with the day's schedule on it. Confusion was reflected on her face when she saw the photo booth. What is this? She asked, stepping closer and pointing to my crossed-out portrait. I was hoping you could tell me, I replied, trying to remain calm. This isn't your work? Of course not. Cheryl looked genuinely shocked. This booth was brought in last night by the bride's parents. We just set it up, but we didn't go through the pictures in detail. This is outrageous. I'm going to take this picture down right now. She reached for the booth, but I stopped her. Dash, hold on. I want to talk to Christian first. Is he here? Yes, he and his friends are getting ready in the West Wing. The guest rooms are on the 2nd floor. I nodded and headed in the indicated direction, still holding the gift. Inside the manor was a pre-wedding bustle. The florists were arranging arrangements. The waiters were preparing tables. The musicians were tuning their instruments. No one paid attention to me, and I went up to the 2nd floor unhindered. In the hallway, I heard men's voices and laughter from behind one of the doors. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. The door was opened by a young man wearing a shirt and pants but no jacket, one of Christian's friends by the looks of it. Dash, yes? He gave me a questioning look. I'd like to see Christian, I said. I'm his grandfather. Oh, the guy turned around in the room. Chris, your grandfather's here. A few seconds later, Christian appeared in the doorway, already fully dressed in his wedding suit. He looked excited and a little confused at the sight of me. Grandpa, you're early. I need to talk to you, Christian, alone, if possible. He hesitated a moment, then nodded and walked out into the hallway, closing the door tightly behind him. What's wrong? He asked, avoiding looking me in the eye. Sekum, did you see the welcome booth out front? I asked bluntly. No, not yet. I've been here since this morning getting ready. There's a picture of me on it that says, no entry allowed. Do you know anything about that? Christian turned pale. What? No, of course not. It's some kind of mistake. I would never. Then who did it? Tess? Your parents? Yeah, I don't know. He looked genuinely shocked. Look, Grandpa, I'll talk to Tess. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding or a stupid joke. A misunderstanding? I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. Christian, I've been hearing for weeks that I'm a cheapskate, that they don't want me at the wedding, and now this. Tell me the truth. Do you want me here tonight? Christian looked like a cornered animal. He opened his mouth to answer, but at that moment a woman's voice sounded in the hallway. Christian, where are you? We both turned around. Tess was approaching us in a silk robe, her hair already done and her makeup flawless. When she saw me, she stopped abruptly. What is he doing here? She asked Christian in a tone as if I were an object, not a person. Tess, this is my grandfather. Christian tried to take control of the situation. We have a little misunderstanding with the welcome booth. No misunderstanding. She cut me off, glaring at me. It's exactly as it should be. We don't want him here. Tess! Christian's voice was desperate. You can't do this. You can't? She raised her voice, and several people looked out of the neighboring rooms. This man has plagued your family with his stinginess all his life. Your father told me everything, how he refused to help you when you were struggling, how he criticized every purchase, how he made you feel like beggars even though he was swimming in money himself. I stood astonished at this sudden attack. A crowd was gathering around us. Christian's friends, bridesmaids, some of the staff. That's not true, I said quietly. Lorenz and Olivia had always lived beyond their means, and I was just... Shut up. Tess stepped close to me, her face contorted with rage. I don't care about your excuses. You think you can just come in here and ruin our day and everything will be okay? You didn't even deign to do your part in organizing the wedding. My parents paid for everything while you sat on your millions. I looked at Christian for support, but he stood there with his head down, not daring to intervene. Actually, I began, finally deciding to reveal my surprise. But I was not allowed to finish. At that moment, a waiter came out of one of the rooms with a tray of champagne glasses. Tess grabbed one of the glasses and splashed the contents in my face. Get out of here, she shouted. Don't ruin the party, you beggar. There was a deafening silence. Champagne dripped down my face, soaking my shirt and tie. The gift I still held in my hands was soaking wet too. Someone in the crowd chuckled. Somebody gave an aghast gasp. I slowly pulled a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped my face, feeling my cheeks burn with humiliation. Christian finally came out of his daze. Tess, how could you... he began, but she interrupted him. It's your choice, Christian. It's either him or me, right now. My grandson looked at me with an expression of such helplessness and shame that I felt sorry for him. I realized he wasn't going to take my side. Not today. Not against the woman he'd chosen as his life partner. There's no need, Christian, I said quietly. I was leaving. I turned and walked down the hallway toward the stairs, feeling the stares of dozens of eyes on me. No one stopped me. No one said a word in my defense. Not even Christian. As I walked down the stairs, I saw Lorenz and Olivia coming up to meet me. They froze in place when they saw my wine-wet face and clothes. Dad? What's wrong? Lorenz looked genuinely surprised. Ask your future daughter-in-law, I said coldly and walked past without stopping. As I exited the manor, I noticed that the welcome booth had already been removed. Cheryl was standing nearby with a phone in her hand, apparently trying to resolve the crisis that had arisen. When she saw me, she hurried toward me. Mr. Abbott, what's wrong? You're all wet. I was kicked out, Cheryl, I said, trying to maintain my dignity. Quite rude, I must say. But how? Who? It doesn't matter. I'm out of here. Thank you for your help in organizing. You were very professional. I handed her a soggy present. If you don't mind, give this to Christian after the ceremony. And tell him I wish him happiness no matter what. Cheryl took the gift, sympathy in her eyes. Mr. Abbott, I'm so sorry. Can we call you a cab or... That's okay. My car's in the parking lot. Goodbye, Cheryl. I walked towards the parking lot, feeling a strange numbness inside. The shock of what had happened hadn't worn off yet, but somewhere deep inside, anger was building. Not so much at Tess after all. She was just a selfish and spoiled girl, but at Christian and Lorenz. They had let it happen. They stood by and watched me being humiliated and didn't say a word. Getting into the car, I didn't start the engine right away. My thoughts were swirling in my head. My hands were shaking slightly. Looking at myself in the rearview mirror, I saw an old man with wine-red stains on his face and collar. It was pathetic. And then it hit me. A gift. My main gift was paying for the wedding. They still thought Tess's parents were paying for everything. What if I... No, that would be too petty. It wouldn't be dignified. But the more I thought about it, the more appealing the idea seemed. They humiliated me, made me look like a greedy old man in front of everyone, denied me basic respect. Why should I pay for their holiday after that? I pulled out my phone and called my banker. Luckily, he was at work on Saturday. Good morning, Mr. Abbott. What can I do for you? James, I need to cancel one payment urgently, I said, making my final decision. That big transfer to Woodlands Manor for my grandson's wedding. Cancel it, but it's already been held for weeks. We can try to request a refund, but there's no guarantee. Do everything you can, James. I want that money back in my account as soon as possible. I understand. I'll contact the beneficiary's bank immediately. But Mr. Abbott, I must warn you, these transactions usually require the consent of the other party, especially if the service is already being provided. Tell them it's a mistake, that the payment was made in error and was intended for a different payee. Think of something, James. I don't want them to keep that money. I'll do my best, sir. I'll call you as soon as there's any news. I thanked him and hung up. My heart was pounding, but I felt strangely relieved, as if I had lifted a heavy weight off my shoulders. Then I dialed Cheryl's number. Mr. Abbott? Her voice sounded concerned. Cheryl, I have something very serious to talk to you about. I'm canceling all payments for the wedding. There was a pause. What? But the event has already begun. The guests will be arriving soon. The caterers are preparing the food. The musicians. I'm sorry, Cheryl, but the decision has been made. I've already contacted the bank. They'll be calling you shortly about a refund. But Mr. Abbott, this is going to cause a huge problem. The whole wedding will be disrupted. I'm afraid that's no longer my concern, I said firmly. Let Tess's parents pay for everything, as they'd planned, from what they'd said. But they haven't paid anything. You're the only one who paid the principal. Exactly. And now everyone will see who really is the cheapskate in this story. Cheryl sighed. I understand how you feel after being treated like that. But maybe you should think about Christian. This is his day after all. I thought for a moment. Christian, my grandson, who stood by and watched me humiliated and didn't say a word in my defense. Christian made his choice, I finally said. Now let him live with the consequences. After talking to Cheryl, I started the car and drove out of the parking lot. As I drove past the main entrance of the manor house, I noticed that a small group of guests had already gathered there. They would soon learn that the wedding might not be happening, or at least not as lavish as planned. The drive home seemed endless. Emotions raged inside, anger, resentment, disappointment, but also a strange sense of release. For years, I'd let Lorenz and Olivia use me, manipulate me, make me look bad in front of Christian. I've always yielded, always compromised, always been the understanding old man. But today, that had come to an end. As I pulled up to the house, I felt my phone vibrate. James, Mr. Abbott, I have good news. The recipient's bank has agreed to a refund, given your years of impeccable customer service. The money will be returned to your account within 1 or 2 business days. Thank you, James. You're a true professional. Always happy to help, sir. Although I must admit this is a rather unusual situation, I chuckled. Believe me, James, you have no idea how unusual. When I entered the house, the first thing I did was to go to the bathroom and stand under the shower for a long time, washing away the residue of champagne and humiliation. Then I changed into home clothes, made myself a sandwich and a cup of tea, and sat down in a chair by the window. I left my phone on silent, but I could see the screen light up from incoming calls. Lorenz, Olivia, Lorenz again, an unknown number, probably Christian or one of the wedding planners. I didn't answer. At some point, I dozed off in my chair, exhausted from the emotional strain of the day. When I woke up, I saw that it was getting dark. My phone showed 137 missed calls, an incredible number. There must have been a real panic at the estate when it became clear that the payment had been canceled. I imagined the scene. The guests were already assembled, everything was ready for the ceremony, and suddenly Cheryl took Hamish Galloway aside and told him that the bill had not been paid. Tess's parents are shocked because they thought they were paying for everything. Tess is hysterical. Christian is confused. Lorenz and Olivia are trying to find me to somehow resolve the situation. Part of me felt guilty for ruining the holiday, but the other part, the stronger part, said I did the right thing. They deserved this lesson. All of them. I turned on my phone and listened to the voicemails. Most of them were from Lorenz. First perplexed, then pleading, then furious. A few from Olivia. She went from tears to threats and back again. One from Christian, a quiet, confused apology and a request to call back. The last message was from Cheryl. Mr. Abbott. Her voice sounded tired but professionally restrained. I just want to let you know that the situation has been resolved in a certain way. Mr. Galloway has agreed to pay some of the expenses so that the ceremony can continue, albeit in a more modest format. Some elements had to be canceled. I'm not judging your decision, given the circumstances, but I thought it might be helpful for you to know how it ended. I sighed. So the wedding had happened after all. Part of me was happy for Christian, whatever had happened between us. He didn't deserve to have his special day completely ruined. But the other part of me almost regretted that my act hadn't had more dramatic consequences. I put the phone away and walked over to the bookcase where an old photo album was kept. Flipping through it, I found the picture I was looking for. Christian at the age of 7 sitting on my lap, both of us laughing about something. It was during a fishing trip on Lake Clarity. Simple, happy times. What went wrong? When did this pure, loving child turn into a man who allows his grandfather to be humiliated and doesn't say a word in his defense? I closed the album and returned to my chair. It was starting to rain outside, the drops tapping on the glass. The sound was soothing, almost hypnotic. I sat in the dark, listening to the rain, thinking about the vicissitudes of family relationships, about love that can be distorted by envy and resentment, about how difficult it can be to distinguish between real generosity and manipulation. The phone vibrated again. Lorenz. I didn't answer. Today I had spoken my word, not with words, but with action. And that was enough. When I woke up the next morning, I felt a strange mixture of feelings. On the one hand, the weight of yesterday's events pressed on my chest. On the other hand, there was some inexplicable relief, as if I had dropped the burden I had been carrying for years. I hadn't turned on my phone since the evening. I didn't want to be inundated with angry messages and calls. Instead, I made myself a leisurely breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon, toast, and strong coffee. Sitting at the kitchen table, I reflected on my decision yesterday. Maybe it had been impulsive. Maybe I should have cooled down first and then acted. No, I decided, sipping my coffee. Even if I'd had time to think it over calmly, the result would have been the same. You can't let people treat you like that, even if it's your family, especially if it's your family. After breakfast, I turned on my computer to check my bank account. I wanted to make sure James had actually been able to cancel the payment. Logan, password, and there I see last month's statement. The payment to Woodlands Manor was still listed, but it had already been marked in-process refund next to it. So the process is underway. Soon the money would be back in my account. I leaned back in my chair. It was a lot of money. What should I do with it now? I'd planned to open an account in Christian's name after the wedding, a little seed money for him and Tess. Now that idea seemed ridiculous. Maybe I should finally realize a long-held dream and buy that cabin by Lake Clarity that Miriam and I had always talked about. It was our shared dream to retire and spend our days watching the water and reading books on the porch. Life has decreed otherwise, but perhaps it's not too late to realize at least part of that plan. Immersed in thought, I didn't immediately hear the doorbell ring. It was only when the knocking became insistent that I got up and went to open it, wondering who could have come on a Sunday morning. On the threshold stood Lorenz, unshaven with red eyes and wrinkled clothes. He looked as if he had been up all night. Finally, he breathed when he saw me. Why aren't you answering your cell phone? We've been going crazy. Good morning, Lorenz, I said calmly. The phone is disconnected. I'm resting. Resting? He looked at me with disbelief. After what you did? Do you realize what you've done? I stared at my son in silence, not inviting him in. He staggered from foot to foot on the threshold, clearly not knowing where to begin. "You ruined Christian's wedding," he finally blurted out. "You humiliated us in front of everyone. The Galloways are furious. Tess is weeping. Christian is—" I've never seen him so depressed. "I've ruined a wedding." My voice remained calm, but my anger was beginning to boil up inside. "Wasn't it your future daughter-in-law who poured wine on me and threw me out of the ceremony? Didn't you tell everyone for years that I was a cheapskate who didn't help the family?" Lawrence hesitated for a moment. That doesn't justify what you did afterwards. Canceling the payment at the last moment when everything had already started. That's mean," I prompted. "Like putting my picture up with no trespassing written on it. How to lie to my grandson about me for years. How to allow me to be humiliated in front of all the guests." "Look," Lorenz changed tactics, his tone almost pleading. "I understand that you're upset. What Tess did was unforgivable. We were all shocked. But why did you have to punish Christian? It wasn't his fault." "Not his fault," I grinned bitterly. "He stood by and watched as I was insulted. Didn't say a word in my defense. That's unforgivable too, Lorenz." My son ran his hand through his hair, clearly not knowing what else to say. "Da firm, you have to make it right," he finally said. "Call the bank, return the money." "No," I said firmly. "I don't have to, and I won't." "But the Galloways think they paid for the wedding," Lorenz exclaimed. "We can't admit that all this time." He stopped short, but it was too late. He faltered, but it was too late. "All this time? What?" I stared at his face. "What did you tell them, Lorenz?" The son lowered his eyes. They thought Olivia and I had paid our share of the expenses, and we didn't try to dissuade them." "You misappropriated my gift," I said slowly, realizing the depth of the deception. "You passed my money off as your own." "It was a gift to Christian, not to us," Lorenz tried to justify himself. "And so you thought you could use my generosity as you pleased? To make me look like a cheapskate while you bask in the glory of your generous parents?" Lorenz had no answer. We stood in silence, looking at each other across the threshold like strangers. "Go away," I said at last. "I have nothing more to say to you. Dad, please, go away, Lorenz. Now." He opened his mouth as if he wanted to add something, then waved his hand and turned back to the car. "You'll regret it," he said over his shoulder, "when you cool down and realize what you've done." I closed the door without answering. My hands were shaking slightly, and I took a few deep breaths to calm myself down. Then I went back into the kitchen, poured more coffee, and sat by the window, looking out at the street. Lorenz's car was still parked in front of the house. He was sitting behind the wheel, talking on the phone, surely reporting to Olivia about his failed attempt to reason with me. I turned away from the window and picked up the landline. It was time to talk to James and make sure the refund process was going smoothly. James Hawthorne speaking. "James, this is Farnsworth Abbott. I'm calling to check on the status of the chargeback." "Good morning, Mr. Abbott." "Yes, everything's going according to plan. I've received confirmation from the beneficiary's bank. They've already initiated the refund, and the funds should be in your account tomorrow or the day after tomorrow." "That's great. One more question. Is there any way they can cancel the refund or block it?" "Theoretically, if they could prove that the service was rendered in full and you accepted it, but since the event had not yet ended at the time of your claim and you claimed fraud on the part of the recipient, they have little chance. Also, in your case, given your reputation and history with the bank, we are completely on your side." "Thank you, James. You've put my mind at ease." "Always happy to help, Mr. Abbott. I'll call you when the funds are deposited." After talking to the banker, I felt more confident. I looked out the window and Lorenz's car was gone. He must have realized that persuasion was futile. I decided to check my cell phone. Turning it on, I was stunned by the incessant stream of notifications. 64 voice messages, 123 text messages, 40 missed calls in the morning alone. Among the callers were numbers I didn't recognize, maybe Tess's parents or one of the wedding planners. There were a few calls from Cheryl. Most were from Lorenz and Olivia, a few from Christian. I didn't listen to all the messages, selectively opening some of them. "Dad, call me back right away. What have you done? Everything is falling apart." Lorenz's voice, panic in every word. "Mr. Abbott, this is Cheryl Price. Please contact me as soon as possible. An emergency payment situation has arisen. Grandfather, this is Christian. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Please call. Farnsworth, are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what's going on here? Tess's parents are furious. They say we cheated them. Christian's in shock. Call me back right away. Olivia, almost screaming into the phone. I put the phone away, not wanting to immerse myself in this maelstrom of emotions. Instead, I turned on the radio and went about my household chores. Strangely, I felt surprisingly calm. It was as if a loud but cleansing thunder had rumbled over my life, and now the air felt fresher. Around noon, the doorbell rang again. This time I was pretty sure it was Olivia. She was always more persistent than Lorenz. But when I opened the door, I saw Christian. My grandson looked terrible. Puffy eyes, pale face, slumped shoulders. His wedding suit had been replaced by a crumpled t-shirt and jeans. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I hesitated for only a moment. Despite everything that had happened, this was my grandson, the one I had loved since the first day of his life. "Of course, Christian. Come in." He entered the house and hesitated in the hallway, as if unsure of where to go next. I pointed to the living room. "Sit down. Would you like some coffee, or maybe something stronger?" "Saki, no thanks." He sank down on the edge of the couch, hands clasped between his knees. "I came to talk about last night." I sat down in the chair across from him, waiting for him to continue. Christian took a long time to gather his thoughts. "What Tess did? It's unforgivable," he finally said. "I didn't know about the picture at the entrance. I didn't know she was planning what happened in the hallway. And if you had," I asked bluntly, "would you have stopped her?" Christian lowered his head. "I want to believe I would have. But honestly, I don't know. Yeah, I was so focused on the wedding, on making sure everything went perfectly. And Tess, she can be very persuasive." "You were standing there, Christian," I said quietly, watching me get humiliated and not saying a word. "I know," his voice trembled, "and I'm ashamed. I was a coward." We were silent for a moment. Outside the window, a flock of birds flew by, heading south. After what you did with the money," Christian continued, "everything fell apart. Cheryl reported that the payment had been canceled. Tess's parents were shocked. They thought they'd paid most of it themselves. Then it turned out you'd organized the whole thing. Tess yelled at my parents. They tried to justify themselves. It was a nightmare. "I'm sorry your day was ruined," I said, and it was true. "But I don't regret my decision." "I understand," Christian nodded. "After the way you've been treated, I just wanted you to know that the ceremony happened. It was a cut and dried affair. Tess's parents covered some of the costs so they didn't have to cancel the whole thing. But half the guests had already left when the uproar started." I nodded, feeling no satisfaction at the news. Revenge had never been my goal. "What about Tess?" I asked. "Does she realize that she ruined her own wedding with her own behavior?" Christian grinned bitterly. "She blames you and my parents for everything. She says she was tricked, made a fool of in front of her own parents." "And you? Do you blame me too?" He looked up, and I saw tiredness and sadness in his eyes. "No, Grandpa. I blame myself for letting all this happen, for not taking your side when I should have, and for not seeing what Tess could really be." "What now?" I asked. "Are you two still together?" Christian ran his hand over his face. "I don't know. After last night, I saw a different side of her. Her cruelty to you, her tantrums when things didn't go according to plan. It made me wonder if I really wanted to spend the rest of my life with someone like that." I kept silent, not wanting to influence his decision. It was his choice, his life. "You know what the weirdest thing is?" Christian continued after a pause. "When all this happened, my first instinct was to come to you, to talk, to ask for advice, like when I was a kid, when I was in trouble. And then I remembered that you're the cause of all this chaos, and the victim at the same time. It's all so confusing." "Life is rarely simple, my boy," I said softly. "Sure, especially when it comes to family." Christian nodded and stood up, clearly preparing to leave. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry about the way you were treated, about not protecting you, E. Thank you for wanting to give us such a generous gift, even if things didn't end up as planned. I stood up too, and on a sudden impulse hugged my grandson. He tensed for a moment, then relaxed and hugged me back. We stood like that for a few seconds without saying a word. Whatever happens next, I said, pulling away, know that I'm always here for you, if you need to talk or just sit in silence. Thank you, Grandpa. Christian smiled weakly. I appreciate it, I really do. After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching him get into his car and drive away. Something in our conversation gave me hope that not all was lost, that perhaps something new, healthier, more honest, could be born out of this chaos. The phone started ringing again. This time it was Hamish Galloway. I decided to answer it. Mr. Abbott? It's Hamish Galloway. We need to talk. Yes, Mr. Galloway, I answered calmly. Do you realize what you've done? His voice shook with barely restrained anger. My daughter is inconsolable. Our family is humiliated. We spent a considerable amount of money to save the wedding you sabotaged. Your daughter poured wine on me and threw me out of the wedding, I reminded her, after she posted a picture of me with a no trespassing sign on it. Do you find that kind of behavior acceptable? That's a different matter, he exclaimed. Tess was upset. She'd heard so many unflattering stories about you from Lorenz and Olivia that— Exactly, I interrupted. Now, she had judged me on the basis of other people's words without even trying to find out the truth, and she was incredibly cruel. And now you're calling me to complain? Hamish was silent for a moment. Look, Mr. Abbott, his tone changed, more businesslike. There's no changing what happened, but we could come to some kind of agreement, compensation for the expenses we've had to incur because of your behavior. I chuckled. Mr. Galloway, your daughter publicly humiliated me. Your family has received their compensation in the form of a ruined wedding. We're even. This is unacceptable. He flared up again. I will be forced to seek legal counsel. Do me a favor, I replied calmly. Explain to them how your daughter treated an elderly man she didn't even know. Tell them how she posted a picture of me with no trespassing on it. I'm sure the judge will be thrilled. There was a pause. You'll regret this, Mr. Abbott, Hamish said. We have connections in this town. So do I, Mr. Galloway. I've lived here all my life. Now, if you don't mind, I have better things to do than listen to threats. I hung up the phone, feeling strangely satisfied. For years, I'd avoided conflict, made concessions, compromised. But sometimes you just have to say no. Stand up for your boundaries. Show that you can't be treated like a doormat. The phone rang again, but this time I didn't answer it. Instead, I turned it off, disconnected the landline too. Then I sat down at my computer and opened the real estate agency's website. It was time to get busy looking for that very cabin at Clarity Lake. Looking through the listings, I felt strangely peaceful. It was like pulling out a bad tooth after a long, agonizing process. The pain was still palpable, but with it came relief, the realization that the worst was over. I saved a few of my favorite options and closed the computer. Tomorrow I'd call the real estate agent and schedule viewings. And tonight I'm just going to rest. I'll read the book I've been putting off for weeks. Maybe watch an old movie that Miriam loved. Wrapped up in a comforter, with a cup of hot tea on the table beside me, I opened the book. The silence in the house no longer seemed oppressive. It was peaceful, deserved, mine. Yes, the last 24 hours had been some of the hardest of my life. I'd lost something important, the illusions of my family, the hope of rebuilding my relationship with Lorenz, the chance to be closer to Christian, but I gained something equally valuable. Self-respect, the realization that I deserved better treatment, freedom from a toxic relationship that had sucked the life force out of me for years. Maybe later, when the passions subside, Christian and I can start building something new. Something more honest, more healthy, or maybe not. Either way, I will no longer live for the approval of people who only see me as a purse on legs. I closed my eyes, listening to the ticking of the clock and the rustle of the wind outside the window. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Lonely? Yes. Sad? Absolutely. But peaceful. And that peace of mind was worth all the storms I'd gone through to achieve it. It's been a week since the wedding. I was back to my usual routine. Work at the print shop, evenings at home with a book or watching TV. I still kept my phone turned off most of the time, turning it on only twice a day to check important messages. The calls from Lorenz and Olivia were getting fewer and fewer. Christian hadn't called at all since our conversation. In the back of my mind, I hoped he was contemplating his life and his relationship with Tess, but I didn't let myself get too caught up in those thoughts. It was his life now, his decisions. The money for the wedding came back into my account on Tuesday, just as James had promised. I'd already contacted a real estate agent and scheduled viewings of a few cabins near Lake Clarity for the coming weekend. The thought of a fresh start was energizing and gave me an optimism I hadn't felt in a while. On Thursday, I stayed late at the print shop dealing with quarterly reports. Irma came into my office about 6 o'clock, getting ready to leave. Mr. Abbott, do you need any help with those papers? I could stay a while. No, thank you, Irma. I'm almost done. Go home, your family's waiting. She paused in the doorway. Mr. Abbott, I heard about what happened at your grandson's wedding. I looked up from my papers. Irma had worked with me for 20 years. She was not just a secretary, but a confidant in a sense. News travels fast, doesn't it? In a small town, she shrugged awkwardly. My nephew works for the catering service that catered the event. He told me what chaos there was when the organizers started packing up equipment right during the reception. I set my pen aside. Of course, in a town like Big Stone Gap, it's impossible to hide a scandal like this, especially considering how many people were involved, the estate staff, the catering, the musicians, the guests. And what did he say? Irma sat down on the edge of the chair opposite me. He said everything was going fine up to a certain point. The ceremony ended, the reception began. The guests were already drinking champagne and eating hors d'oeuvres. And then the estate manager took the bride's parents aside and told them something. After that, a real scandal broke out. I'm picturing this scene. Cheryl tactfully informs Hamish Galloway that the wedding payment has been canceled. His shock, his disbelief, then his anger. The bride's parents were yelling at the groom's parents, Irma continued. Something about money and cheating. Then representatives of various services started arriving, florists, musicians, and demanded payment on the spot, or they would take everything away. The guests didn't understand what was going on. Some began to leave slowly. And what about the newlyweds? I asked, suddenly feeling a prick of conscience. My nephew said the bride was screaming and crying, and the groom looked completely lost. At one point, the bride's father announced that he would pay some of the expenses so that the wedding could go on. But many of the guests had already left by then, and some of the services had to be canceled anyway. The live music was replaced by speakers with a playlist. Half of the floral arrangements were taken away. I listened silently, trying to understand how I felt. There was no gloating. I never wanted to hurt Christian, but there was no regret for what I'd done either. They deserved this lesson, all of them. People say different things, of course, Irma added carefully. Some say you were cruel. Others say the groom's parents got what they deserved for making you look like a cheapskate for years, while they were living the high life themselves. What do you think, Irma? I asked, though I wasn't usually interested in other people's opinions of me. She thought for a moment. I've worked with you long enough, Mr. Abbott, to know that you're not the kind of man who would do something like that without a good reason. And I've seen how often your son and daughter-in-law have come here for money, and how they've talked about you behind your back. So, she shrugged, I'm on your side. Thank you, Irma. I was touched by her loyalty. It means more to me than you realize. She smiled and stood up. Don't stay up too late, Mr. Abbott. The reports aren't going anywhere until tomorrow. After Irma left, I sat there for a while, pondering what I had heard. The wedding had turned into a disaster, just as I had suspected. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was fatigue. This whole situation had taken too much emotional energy from me. I closed the reports, deciding to continue with them tomorrow, and drove home. The evening was quiet, with a light fall rain that lullingly pounded on the roof of the car. As I approached the house, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway, a silver sedan that clearly didn't belong to Lorenz or Christian. Parking, I gingerly approached the house. Standing on the porch was a woman I didn't immediately recognize in the twilight. Mr. Abbott? She stepped forward. I'm Cheryl Price from Woodlands Manor. Cheryl, I was surprised to see her. What are you doing here? She looked tense but determined. I need to talk to you. It's important. I hesitated only a moment, then nodded and unlocked the door. Come in. Would you like tea or coffee? No, thanks. She stepped inside, looking around with some curiosity. We walked into the living room, and I motioned for her to sit down. Cheryl sank down on the edge of the couch, clutching a small leather folder in her hands. I came to apologize, she began without preamble, and to explain something. Apologize? I was surprised. Apologize for what? For what happened at the wedding? For not being able to prevent the incident with the photo and with the bride. We should have controlled the situation more carefully. You couldn't have known this would happen. I shook my head. And you certainly couldn't have predicted Tessa's behavior. Maybe, she didn't sound convinced. But I should have seen something wrong when I saw that booth, and I'd like to clear up something about the financial side. Cheryl opened a folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. After everything that happened, I did a little research. It turns out your son and his wife came to the estate several times without your knowledge. They met with our previous manager, who had gone on vacation just before your first visit, and, she hesitated, they introduced themselves as sponsors of the wedding. What? I felt my jaw tighten. Did they say they were paying for the wedding? Not exactly, Cheryl explained carefully. They said that the groom's family is covering all the expenses. They didn't specify what you would contribute to the main amount, but they were involved in choosing the menu, the decor, the music, and they emphasized their role everywhere. When I got to work and you came forward with an offer to pay for the wedding anonymously, I had no idea that your son was already posing as an organizer and sponsor. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of this information. So Lorenz and Olivia hadn't just let Tessa's parents think they were paying for the wedding. They'd actively made it seem like they were picking up the tab themselves. They were using my generosity to make themselves look wealthy and generous. I see, I finally said. Thank you for telling me about it, Cheryl. That's not all. She handed me one of the sheets. This is the estimate that was originally shown to your son and daughter-in-law, and here's the one that was later shown to you. I looked at the numbers and felt a wave of anger rising inside. The amount in the estimate that Lorenz and Olivia had seen was almost 30% less than the one they'd presented to me. They knew I'd pay more, I said quietly. They decided to take advantage of that. I'm afraid so, Cheryl nodded. Your son even hinted to our manager that you like fancy gestures and would probably want to pay for the most expensive option. I sat stunned by the depth of the betrayal. They hadn't just taken advantage of my generosity. They had purposefully manipulated me into paying more so they could take credit. After the scandal at the wedding, Cheryl continued, I began to put the facts together and realized what had happened. I felt ashamed that our company, even if unwittingly, had become complicit in such a deception. That's why I'm here, to apologize and tell the truth. It wasn't your fault, I shook my head. You were just doing your job. It's the fault of those who use my feelings for my grandson for their own purposes. Cheryl hesitantly touched my arm. If it's any consolation, many of the guests realized what had happened when the truth came out. And most were on your side, especially after it became known how your fiancé had treated you. I smiled weakly. Thank you, Cheryl, for your honesty and for taking the time to come and tell me all this. She nodded and began gathering the papers back into the folder. There's one more thing, she said after a moment's hesitation. The bride's parents have filed a complaint against our estate. They are demanding compensation for the ruined event. My boss asked me to see if you'd be willing to be a witness if the case went to trial. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Witness? Yes. To tell me how it really happened that you decided to pay for the wedding anonymously, as the planner, and then canceled the payment after you were treated inappropriately. And that it wasn't the fault of the estate. It got me thinking. The thought of a trial, of a public trial of this whole ugly story, was unpleasant. But on the other hand, why should the manor suffer for the actions of my family and the Galloways? All right, I nodded. I'll testify if I have to. But I hope it won't come to that. Me too, Cheryl sighed. Scandals like this aren't good for anyone. After Cheryl left, I sat in silence for a long time, digesting the information I had received. The extent of Lorenz and Olivia's manipulation was staggering. They hadn't just let me pay for the wedding, they'd purposely inflated the cost, knowing I wouldn't say no to my grandson. All the while making me look like a cheapskate in front of Christian and Tess. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my musings. This time it was Lorenz and Olivia, both of them with a determined look on their faces. "We need to talk," Lorenz said without preamble. "About what?" I hesitated to invite them in. "About what you did," Olivia practically shouted the words. "You ruined Christian's wedding. You humiliated us in front of the whole town. Now Tess's parents are threatening to sue, and our son is thinking about divorce." Divorce? That was news to me. Did they get married yet? Of course they're married. Lorenz stepped forward, and I stepped back involuntarily, allowing them to enter the house. The ceremony took place despite your attempts to sabotage it. Half the guests had left by then, and the reception had become a farce. They went into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Olivia flopped down on the couch, and Lorenz stood hovering over me. "We demand compensation," he said. "You have to reimburse Tess's parents for all the expenses they incurred saving the wedding, and us for moral damages." I looked at my son, not recognizing him. When did he become like that? This greedy, manipulative man, willing to use even his own father? "So now you're demanding compensation," I said slowly. "After using me to make me look like a generous wedding sponsor. After deliberately inflating the estimate, knowing I would pay." Lorenz froze for a moment. "What are you talking about?" "Cheryl Price was just here." I pointed to the chair where the estate manager had recently sat. "She showed me both estimates, the one you saw and the one she showed me later. The difference was almost 30%. Convenient, isn't it? I pay more and you get all the laurels." Olivia turned pale and cast a quick glance at her husband. Lorenz looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. It's not what you think," he began. "No?" I stood up, suddenly feeling a surge of energy. "What is it, Lorenz? Explain it to me. Explain why you spent years making me look like a cheapskate in front of Christian, even though I paid for his college tuition. Explain why you let Tess put up a picture of me with no trespassing on it. Explain why neither of you said a word when I was poured wine and kicked out of the ceremony." Lorenz took a step back, clearly not expecting such an attack. We didn't know about the photograph," he muttered. "And as for the incident with Tess, it all happened so fast. We were in shock." "So shocked that you didn't even call to apologize afterwards?" I grinned bitterly. "You only called when you found out that I canceled the payment. Only then did I suddenly become important." "That's not fair," Olivia interjected. "But we've always appreciated you. It's just..." "Just what?" I interrupted. "Just thought of me as an ATM machine? A source of money that should know its place and not interfere with your life?" They were silent, avoiding looking me in the eye. There was more recognition in that silence than in any words. "Go away," I said at last. "I won't make up for anything. Not to Tess's parents, not to you. You've gotten the lesson you deserved long ago. You can't just..." "I can," I said firmly, "and I will. Now please leave my house." Lorenz looked like he wanted to add something, but Olivia tugged on his sleeve. "Let's go," she said quietly. "It's no use." They headed for the door. Lorenz turned around on the threshold. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice not threatening, but rather sad. "Aunt, when you're all alone..." "I already regret it," I answered, "for not seeing the truth sooner, for letting you manipulate me for years. But about canceling the payment for the wedding? Never." The door closed behind them, and I was alone in the quiet house. Strangely, instead of devastation, I felt a kind of clarity. It was as if the veil had fallen from my eyes and I finally saw my family for who they really were. I went back into the living room and sat down in the chair. The papers Cheryl had shown me were still on the table, clear evidence of the betrayal of the people closest to me. I gathered them up and put them away in the desk drawer. I might still need them if the case went to trial. The phone rang, and I automatically reached for it, but then changed my mind. Whoever it was, the conversation could wait until tomorrow. I had enough information to think about today as it was. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. It was dark outside, and the rain was getting heavier, turning the world outside the glass into a blur of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there on this rainy evening, my grandson was deciding if his marriage was worth saving. My son and daughter-in-law were probably debating how to win back my favor, not out of love, but for financial reasons. And Tessa's parents were probably already consulting with lawyers about the possibility of a lawsuit. All these people, connected to me by blood or circumstance, were suddenly strangers. And in a strange way, this realization brought not pain, but release. I was no longer obliged to conform to their expectations, to play the role they had assigned me. I could be myself with all my flaws and strengths. I pulled back the curtain and returned to my chair. Tomorrow will be a new day. I'll go to Lake Clarity to look at cabins. Perhaps I'll start the process of selling the print shop. My managers have long expressed interest in buying the business. Life goes on, and there may yet be many good things in it. The phone rang again, insistently demanding attention. This time I did pick it up, figuring it might be something important. Farnsworth Abbott speaking. Mr. Abbott? This is Ray Turner from Mountain Lake Real Estate. I'm calling about that house on Clarity you wanted to see on Saturday. Yes, Mr. Turner. Anything wrong? Nothing bad, just the opposite. The owner dropped the price 10%. Wanted to make sure you were still interested in seeing it. I smiled. Maybe it was a sign that I'd made the right decision, starting a new chapter of my life. More than interested, Mr. Turner. I'll be there at 11, as agreed. Good. I'll see you Saturday then. I hung up the phone feeling a little nervous. The lake house. A new beginning. A life without toxic relationships and manipulation. Yes, I could be alone, but alone doesn't always mean loneliness. Sometimes it means freedom. Freedom to be myself. Freedom to choose who to spend time with. Freedom to decide how to spend my money and energy. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. It's going to be okay. Not right away, not tomorrow, but in time. I'd gotten over losing Miriam. I'd get over this. The April sun bathed the veranda of my new house with a soft, almost summer-like warmth. I sat in a wicker chair with a cup of coffee, watching the morning mist slowly dissolve over the waters of Lake Clarity. 5 months had passed since that ill-fated day at Christian's wedding, and in that time my life had changed beyond recognition. The house I'd bought in November was exactly what Miriam and I had always dreamed of, small but cozy, with a wide veranda overlooking the lake. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace, a modern kitchen, everything you need for a comfortable life. Most of the windows overlook the lake, allowing you to admire sunsets and sunrises from the comfort of your armchair. The first weeks after the move, I spent setting up the house and getting used to the new rhythm of life. Strangely enough, the adaptation went easier than I expected. Maybe because this place felt like home from the start, as if a part of me had always been here, waiting for me to finally arrive. I sold the print shop to my managers, Michael and Rachel, who had worked with me for over a decade. They had long dreamed of owning their own business, and when I offered to buy them out, they agreed without hesitation. The price was fair, with a 5-year installment plan. I didn't need a large sum right away, and they could start without the burden of credit. Irma was the only person I kept in touch with from my former life. She called once a month, telling me news of the printing house in the city. From her, I learned that Christian and Tess had broken up 2 weeks after the wedding. They hadn't officially divorced. Apparently, they decided to live apart and think about it first. Christian rented an apartment in a neighboring town and got a job teaching physics at the local school. Lorenz and Olivia, according to Irma, had fallen on hard times. The loans they'd racked up, counting on my help, were now weighing on them. They had to sell the pool house and move into a smaller apartment. I listened to the news with sympathy, but with no desire to interfere. That chapter of my life was closed, and I didn't want to revisit it. Here by the lake, I had found what I had been missing for years: peace and freedom to be myself. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed a boat approaching my dock. It was Harold Simmons, a local fisherman we had met shortly after I moved in. A gray-haired, weathered man about my age who had lived by the lake all his life and knew everything there was to know about it. "Good morning, Farnsworth," he shouted as he docked. "How did you sleep?" "Fine, Harold." I rose to meet him. "Would you like some coffee?" "I'd love some." He climbed out of the boat and up onto the veranda. The trout are just jumping on the hook today. If you want to join us, it's about time." I nodded and went into the house for a second cup. Fishing with Harold had become part of my new routine. 3 or 4 times a week, we went out on the lake, sometimes at dawn, sometimes closer to evening. Harold taught me the ins and outs of local fishing, where the best trout were, how to choose bait depending on the weather, how to read the surface of the water. "The mail's here," Harold said when I returned with my coffee. "I picked yours up from the box by the road since I was passing by anyway." He handed me a small stack of envelopes, mostly bills and flyers, but among them I noticed an envelope with handwriting I'd recognize from 1,000. "Christian." "Thank you." I put the letters on the table, deciding to review them later. "How's the family? Are the grandchildren coming for the weekend?" Harold glowed. His main pride was his 5 grandchildren, whom his daughter and son regularly brought to the lake. "They sure did. They promised to be there Friday night. The youngest, Toby, talks about fishing with Grandpa. You should have seen the bass he pulled out last time. He almost dropped the rod in the water with excitement." I smiled, feeling a slight pang of sadness. Christian had once fished this lake with enthusiasm too. We used to come here every summer when he was about 7 or 8 years old. That's when Miriam and I fell in love with this place, dreaming of buying a cabin here someday. "Sojourn, they should definitely try your apple pie," I said, chasing away the melancholy. "Best thing I've had in years." "It's all Martha's recipe," Harold mentioned his late wife fondly. "She always said the secret was cinnamon and a pinch of ginger." We finished our coffee, discussing plans for the day. I agreed to join Harold for an afternoon of fishing, but in the meantime, I had a few things to do in town. Pick up ordered books from the local store, buy groceries, stop by the drugstore. After Harold left, I went back to writing. The electric and water bills were put aside to be paid later. The flyers went into the wastepaper basket. Finally, I picked up the letter from Christian, scrutinizing the familiar handwriting on the envelope. The return address was unfamiliar, apparently his new apartment. I opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The letter was short, just 1 page. "Dear Grandpa, it's been almost 6 months since the day I wish I could forget, but I can't. I took a long time to gather my thoughts before writing this letter. Perhaps I should have come in person, but I don't know if you'd want to see me, and I'm not sure I'm ready for such a meeting. First of all, something you might be interested in, Tess and I broke up. I can't say it was purely because of the events at the wedding, but they definitely played a part. That day I saw a side of Tess that I hadn't noticed before, or rather didn't want to see. Her cruelty to you made me wonder what kind of person she really is, and what kind of person I am for letting it all happen. I moved to Mountain View, took a teaching job at a local school. I'm starting from scratch. My parents aren't very happy with my decision to break up with Tess. They still think it was the perfect match, but I can't live up to their script anymore. The main thing I want to say is that I'm sorry. Sorry that I stood by and watched you get humiliated and did nothing to stop it. Sorry for letting my parents shape my view of you for years instead of forming my own opinion of you. I'm sorry I lost the warm relationship we had when I was a kid. I'm not apologizing. I know some behaviors can't be forgiven. I just want you to know that I realize how wrong I was, and I am truly sorry for it. If someday you decide you're ready to communicate with me again, I'll be waiting. Until then, I just want to wish you happiness wherever you are. Love, Christian." I reread the letter twice, feeling a lump forming in my throat. Christian's words sounded sincere, with no attempt to make excuses or shift blame. He took responsibility for his actions, or rather, his lack thereof, and that spoke of a maturity I hadn't expected. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to say I understood and was ready for a fresh start. But the other part of me, the more cautious part, the part that had learned from bitter experience, advised me not to rush. The wounds were still too fresh. The trust had been shattered too much. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Then I put it in the desk drawer where I kept important documents. Maybe one day I would answer it. But not today. Today I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I went to the township to run some scheduled errands. Small, cozy Lakeside lived its measured life. I had gotten to know many of the locals over the months and no longer felt like an outsider. Friendly nods and smiles accompanied me at every turn. At the bookstore, I was waiting for a collection of Robert Frost poetry that I had ordered. Miriam had loved his poetry, and I had decided to collect a collection of his books in her memory. The store owner, Eleanor, an older woman with a discerning eye, had already prepared a package with my order. "Good morning, Farnsworth," she greeted me. "Your book arrived just yesterday, and I put Ishiguro's new novel aside for you. I remember you were interested." Thank you, Eleanor," I smiled, appreciating her attentiveness. "I'll take them both." While she made the purchase, we discussed the latest news in the literary world and the book club she'd insisted on inviting me to the following week. I finally agreed to come, deciding it was time to expand my social circle. After the book club, I stopped by a grocery store where local farmers were displaying their wares. I picked out fresh vegetables, fruit, and a loaf of country bread. My last stop was the pharmacy where I picked up my vitamins and blood pressure medicine. When I got home, I laid out my purchases and began preparing dinner. A simple but nutritious soup of fresh vegetables and chicken. Cooking for myself alone still seemed strange after so many years with Miriam, but I was slowly getting used to it. I even started experimenting with recipes, finding a few dishes that I was particularly good at. After lunch, I took my fishing rod and headed for the dock where Harold was already waiting in his boat. The day was windless, perfect for fishing. We sailed out to the middle of the lake, to a spot Harold considered golden for trout fishing. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Harold said as he cast his rod. "I think about how strange life is. I've lived here all my life, never been farther than the next state. You spent all those years in the city running a business, and you're just now finding your way here. But when I watch you sit on the porch and look out over the lake, it's like you've always been a part of it." I nodded, realizing what he meant. This place really did accept me as its own, like I was coming home after a long absence. "My wife and I have always dreamed of a lake house like this," I said. "We planned to move here when we retired, but Miriam didn't live to see that day. She's here with you," Harold said simply. "So is my Martha. Sometimes I feel her presence so clearly, as if she were sitting next to me and watching the sunset with me." We fell silent, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. The fishing rod swayed gently, the sun slowly slipping toward the horizon. At such moments, time seemed to stop, and all problems seemed distant and insignificant. Suddenly, my fishing line was taut and the rod bent. "Got it!" Harold exclaimed. "Come on, pull carefully, don't pull." I began to pull the line slowly, feeling the fish struggling at the other end. The struggle continued for several minutes, until finally a large trout appeared above the water, glistening in the setting sun. A fine specimen. Harold nodded approvingly as he helped me get the fish into the net. 3 pounds at least. It'll make a great dinner." I carefully released the trout from the hook and put it in a container of water. A couple more hours of such successful fishing, and we had a rich catch. 4 trout and a few perch. We decided to divide the catch equally. I would have enough for tonight's dinner and tomorrow's lunch. Harold would take his portion to his son's wife, who was cooking for the whole family. By the time we got back to my dock, the sun was almost hidden behind the horizon, coloring the sky and water in shades of pink and gold. The beauty of the sunset over the lake never ceased to amaze me. "Thanks for the company, Harold," I said, as I helped him tie up the boat, "and for the fishing." "Thank you," he clapped me on the shoulder. "Tomorrow the guys are having a barbecue at Jim Parker's. You're invited, remember?" "Sure," I nodded. "I'll make apple pie with your recipe, see if it works. Just don't overdo it with the cinnamon," he laughed. "See you tomorrow then." Harold left, and I went up to the porch with a container of trout. I decided to clean and cook the fish right away while it was still light. As I worked on the fresh catch, I involuntarily remembered Christian's letter. What would I say to him if I decided to reply? That I too missed the times we were close? That I realize how hard it is to resist my parents' influence? That I was willing to give him a second chance? All of those things were true, but I still wasn't sure I was ready to open up again, to risk being hurt again. Maybe in time, maybe when the pain of betrayal had finally dulled. After preparing the fish, I set the table on the veranda. The evening was warm, and an al fresco dinner seemed like the perfect end to the day. I lit a few candles, opened a bottle of white wine I'd brought back from my last trip to the big city. Sitting at the table with a glass of wine, watching the last rays of sunlight play on the surface of the lake, I thought about the strange turn my life had taken. Loss, betrayal, the severing of family ties. All of these things could have broken me, plunged me into bitterness and loneliness. But instead, I found a new home, new friends, a new raison d'etre. Harold and the other locals accepted me into their circle without question or condition. They didn't inquire about my bank account. They didn't expect me to help them financially. They didn't try to manipulate me. They simply offered friendship based on mutual respect and common interests. And I realized that this is what true family is. Not necessarily bound by blood, but always bound by sincerity and caring. Perhaps someday Christian will be part of this new family. Perhaps he and I will build a relationship based on honesty and respect rather than expectations and obligations. But that will take time. Time for healing, time for forgiveness, time for growth. In the meantime, I had the lake, the house Miriam and I dreamed of, new friends and new opportunities. I had the freedom to be myself, to live by my own rules, to spend my time and money as I saw fit. It wasn't the future I had planned, but it was probably exactly the future I needed. I raised my glass, mentally addressing Miriam. "We've made it, darling. We're finally home." The last ray of sunlight slid across the surface of the lake and disappeared. The first star lit up in the sky. A new day was coming to an end, promising many more days like this ahead. Days filled with simple joys, peace and dignity. Days that I chose to live in my own way, with people deserving of my trust and love. I set the empty glass on the table and breathed in the fresh evening air. It was time to go inside and get ready for bed. Tomorrow was a new day, new meetings, new opportunities, and I was ready for them as never before.